Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. Today, we're going to take a look at whether or not Redfall is actually as bad as everyone's been saying it is. I've currently got some people coming to this video from a part 1 of a walkthrough that I've been doing, and that's going to be linked in the description, so if you want to watch my full walkthrough of this, then you're welcome to do so, obviously. And the kind of continuation of this video here also will be the continuation of the walkthrough, if that makes sense. But for now, in this video, we're going to just basically roam around. We're not going to show any spoilers. We're going to do some side quests and just generally get a feel. In fact, we're going to go here. We're going to go to this safe house, but we're going to get a feel for what the game is like, what I like about the game so far, what I don't like about the game, getting through just sort of some auxiliary activities, let's say, after about 1 hour so far of playtime in the game. So first things first, I have the game on max settings. I'm playing on PC, and I've played it on console, and I'll splice in a teeny tiny bit of console footage here, and you'll be able to see that it just genuinely looks horrendous. Like, the frame rate is so unbelievably bad, and it's bad to the point that I originally received a console review code, and I then emailed Bethesda back and said, I'm really sorry, this is not something I can upload. I want to play on PC instead. I never normally play these sorts of games on PC. It's just less easy for my recording workflow. But this time around, I was like, you know what? It's either I record on PC or I don't record at all. So that's what I'm going to do. So, is it actually as bad as everyone has been saying it is? Well, unfortunately, I think the answer to that is actually yes. You're going to see just from me fighting this vampire here, for example, that one of the biggest problems the game has, there's actually multiple vampires, okay, let's deal with those, is that the core loop of the game is using your weapon, whatever gun you might be holding, to take down some kind of jumpy vampire thing in front of you, and it just isn't fun. It's actually annoying, because Arcane are not known for having amazing gunplay in their games. I think that's fair to say. And despite the fact that I think they've made improvements to the gunplay in this game that they might not have had in some of their other titles, that doesn't mean that the gunplay is actually good. It may be better than a bad product before. Well, bad product may be the wrong word to use here. It may have been better than something that was passable before, but in a game that relies so heavily on the gunplay and on that loop, it just isn't good enough in my opinion. Like, for example, one of the things I can't stand is that in the game's settings, there is no separate ADS sensitivity compared to your regular mouse or controller sensitivity. And so when I'm not ADSing, my sensitivity feels fine and I can whip around and it's all good. But when I ADS, it feels incredibly sluggish. And this is a game where I'm meant to be ADSing probably about 20% of my total game time in the actual experience. Like, I'm going to ADS a lot because the vampires are so snappy. They bounce around so much. They're really hard to actually aim at. And so I want to ADS to make sure that I'm looking in the right place. And yet, the game is almost incentivizing me not to by making it really awkward when I do. Like, I feel really sluggish, I feel really immobile, and it feels like I'm at a disadvantage. So things like that are quality of life issues or just things that gamers would expect in a game that aren't present here. And I don't really understand why Arcane haven't been made aware of the fact by their playtesters, for example, or why they have ignored the fact that they already knew that these things are essential. So another example that I'll give here, and you'll see this come up in the gameplay as I play. Like I said, I've clocked a little bit more game time in the game now, but I'm just showing you a clip from the very beginning of the game. You're going to notice that there isn't actually a way to mark an objective as your main objective that you want to track and to have that on screen, for instance, or to have that be something that the game is pathing you towards. There is no Hogwarts Legacy Revelio. There is no press a button and the wind shows you the direction you need to run in. There is no press a button and it gives you a little kind of waypoint marker and maybe the path is illuminated and you know the direction that you need to sprint in. There isn't that. There is when you get close to things on occasion, but it's inconsistent. It doesn't always work the same way. And so you'll see, as I'm doing right here, I'm following my blue waypoint marker that I've placed manually on the map. But then you have to go into the map constantly to replace your waypoint marker, which sounds like it's not that big a deal, right? That sounds okay. But then you end up in situations where it's like, okay, I'm where I want to be now, but now I've just got this sort of ugly waypoint marker that's just on the screen being bothersome the entire time. It just doesn't feel good. And it's not a big deal. Again, like, I can live with the fact that there's a blue marker on my screen, but if this was just something that the game did on its own, I would have got to this location, it would know I'm here, the marker would go away, and it would point me towards the next thing that I might need to do, or whatever, right? So there's instances later in the game where I might be doing quests, and I mark a location I need to get to, it tells me a zone I need to get into, and then the only indicator as to what I actually need to do directions-wise is hidden in notes that are in the world. So it's relying on me sitting down and reading paragraph after paragraph of information in order to get context clues about where I'm meant to go, instead of just giving me a direction. And I understand, right? Like, I actually talked to Harvey from Arcane about this at a pre-release event a couple of months ago. And one of the things that he mentioned as part of that was that the game is designed to try and give you a lot of environmental information. So there are a lot of notes that will tell you about the scene that you're in. For example, one of the first things that you find in the game is a scene where there's a vampire that's been frozen by a UV light, and there's a note just next to it explaining that the UV light is what froze the vampire, and you might be able to use that for your own arsenal as well, and it just sort of makes clear that that's what's happened there. But I think that what Arcane have failed to realize is that by hiding information like that inside pieces of text that most players are just going to skip, they assume that the player's understanding of the world is greater than it is at almost all times. Like, basic features like freezing a vampire with UV, totally fine. There's actually a tutorial that will pop up which basically hammers home exactly how that stuff works, and that's good. Like, that's a good thing that they reinforce it in that way. But later in the game, there's a main quest, for example, where you enter this mansion and you find a doll's house, and the instruction that you're given basically is to find 3 dolls that need to go into the doll's house. Like, you just need to collect them from around the house. Now, there's a bit of paper or a book or something on the floor in front of the doll's house that says 1 doll likes to bake, 1 doll likes to garden, and 1 doll likes to be dusty or something. And so you're like, okay, well, it's dusty, it's in the attic, and it's gardening, so it's in the garden, and it's baking, so it's in the kitchen. That's great, right? Environmental information that I've processed as a player and gone, well, this isn't really a puzzle, but I'm putting 2 and 2 together here and getting an outcome of, okay, I need to go to those locations and that's where I'll find the dolls. But if you don't read the note, or if you just assume that the note, which by the way looks pretty much the exact same as all the other notes that you find in the game that are meaningless, if you assume this one's meaningless too, then you basically just have to explore the space and hope for the best. And that's really bad. Like, it's fine, you might find the dolls regardless, but as far as I'm concerned, it's leaving the player to their own devices in a way that they don't expect they're going to need to do. And this brings us to the sort of conversation of games that don't hold your hand, games like an Elden Ring or whatever, right? Where a game might try and force you to figure things out completely on your own. That's lovely when that happens, and that's awesome in a context in which you expect it. But when you don't expect it, in a game like this, where I just expect to be able to kind of be path found through the game almost, if I'm then left to my own devices and I feel lost or confused, it doesn't feel good. It feels really bad, in fact. And I think that expectation mismanagement is a problem that Redfall really suffers from, and it suffers from in a really big way in almost all areas. There are, like I said, some areas where they do handhold you, and it's good, I think, because you need it in moments. But in others, it just feels a bit messy, I suppose, like lacking direction. So the quest design itself could benefit, I think, from there being just a better way to track those sorts of things. The actual quest sort of tracking itself as well here, as you can see, I really don't like. Like, I'm trying here to disable some quests so that I'm hoping the one quest I want to do will be indicated very obviously on my map, and it's just not. Which makes me think that if it's not marked on the map, and it's not marked on my compass at the top, why am I able to track or untrack these quests? Like, it makes no difference to me. And if I don't have my map marker manually placed, like I've said, then I can't see where I'm going at all. And I don't like that. I don't like having to read a paragraph in order to be like, okay, I'm going here, and then to manually place the marker on the map. Like it just is frustrating. Again, it wouldn't be frustrating necessarily in a game that wasn't this style of game. Like if this was the style of game where it was realistic survival or something, and I was having to really kind of go back to first principles of like, okay, I'm going to mark everything on the map manually, and I'm going to do it all sort of in realism mode almost, then maybe I'd have a better time being kind of faced with these features and these decisions. But it's Redfall, and Redfall feels like it should just be a game where I just explore the world, I press a button, it pretty much tells me where I want to go to whatever quest I'm doing at a given time. Maybe it just leads me to a location, that's okay, but at least it leads me there in the first place, and it just has those basic quality of life features surrounding the experience so that I don't bump up against them time and time again and just get frustrated. So that's something that I think is a massive issue with the game. And that's completely separate to the performance, right? And the performance is a really big issue. Also, I hate this. What I just showed you there, the fact that it staggers me when I jump off things is so freaking annoying. I hate getting animation locked in that way in a game where I want to be like jumping around and being mobile. It's just annoying. Anyway, separate to that, performance-wise, it's just not good enough, okay? It's 2023. This game has launched at 30 FPS barely on console. I'm on an incredibly high-end PC. This PC handles any other game max settings like 1440p perfectly, and yet in this game, I'm constantly running into frame stutters, I'm constantly having issues, it's constantly slowing down, and it's slowing down in weird places too. Like I'll be fighting one vampire, it's slowing down. It's just not good enough, and it's one of those releases where I think that presumably they'd be able to fix these things up with patches slowly over time, but it's just another frustrating kind of notch in the belt of all these gamers that will look at a game like this and go, okay, I would like to buy it, but because video games are unreliable at launch these days, I'm just going to have to wait a year and buy it in a sale. Or I'm going to have to wait 6 months, wait for patches to come out, and then play it on Game Pass. And that's really where this game feels like it's going, to be honest. It feels like, because of Xbox's involvement here, not saying that they've made the game worse by any means, but it feels like this game is going to end up being a game that people play on Game Pass if they're bored and they've got nothing else to do. Like, it's good Game Pass fodder, but it's not a good video game. And that really upsets me because Arcane is a studio that I love the work of, and yet we've got into a situation here where somehow they've put something out that is just really shoddy, and it's not up to the level of quality that they as a studio have upheld in all of their other releases. And I just don't understand it. They delayed the game once. They really should have delayed the game again, I think. But they've also made so many decisions that aren't even just time-related, seemingly, but they're like they're purposeful decisions about the pathfinding, for example, like not having some kind of pathfinding system in the game. That's surely something that wasn't a time-related decision. They just decided they didn't want one. And I hate the decision. I don't understand it. Similarly, the fact that there are so many written notes in the world. It feels like a very purposeful decision. Like they haven't accidentally put them here. They've written a huge amount of lore. It's just that it's not fun. I'm playing a video game that's a shooter and you're making me read paragraph after paragraph. And there's important information in there. And by the time you find your third note in the opening area of the game, you are already aware of the fact that most of these are useless. Like the vast majority of them contain just dead info, nonsense, nothing that you would possibly care about. And so when later in the game there is stuff you would care about in those notes, it's like, well, why did you teach me right at the beginning of the game not to pay attention to them then? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Similarly, story-wise, in the opening of the game, you're sort of exploring the world just a little bit, and you look up and you see the sun, and it's like, oh, the black sun is covering the sun. Oh no, they've got rid of the sun. But then you break into this fire station, right, and free some prisoners in there, and that's sort of the opening act, right? Well, not act, but the opening scene, at least. The problem is, you don't care at all about anyone in that fire station. Like, you saved them initially just because they're hostages and the game tells you to do it, but the cutscene that follows, introducing you to the fire station, doesn't really make you care. It doesn't really create any emotional stakes. It doesn't really show why I've done something good or heroic or anything along those lines. It's just a kind of 30-second moment where you see that the fire station is now home base, and then Arcane just expect you to take that for granted and move forwards. And that is something I am baffled by, because again, it's Arcane. Their world building is normally so incredible, and yet in this game, we're getting a situation where the intro of the game makes me completely despondent and completely emotionless towards everything else that follows. And that blows my mind. I don't understand how they've managed to create something I care about so little when the subject matter of the game, the occult horror, the vampires and stuff, is so easily something that should be really emotive and really exciting. Like, we've all seen zombie movies, we've all seen those sorts of things. Vampirism is, I think, something that is a little untapped. Like, there's some really fun and just sort of quirky concepts there that would have been a really easy leg up for a story and could be really great narrative plot devices, like using the fact that people can turn and all those sorts of things, just like zombie movies and things do, is loads of room for emotional twists and turns. And yet, straight away in this game, I'm like, oh, I just don't care about this world. It's a new IP. You got to work extra hard with a new IP to create some kind of emotional connection as fast as you can, I feel like. And they kind of do the opposite, and they almost run away from the possibility of there being a connection in the first place. I don't understand. Blows my mind that they didn't have some kind of more curated opening section that would make you care in a more powerful way. Baffling to me. So, separate to all that, something that I've also seen people complaining about, and personally, I have less issue with, but I want to mention it here because I have definitely seen a lot of comments about this, is the graphics, okay? So right now, I'm recording on PC, like I said. I'm on max graphics, and I have it in 1440p. So it's about as good as the game is ever going to look. And it looks kind of average, I think, in a lot of ways. There isn't anything particularly impressive about the graphics or just about the art direction even, or anything really in the visuals department. I think it looks fine, but it still does kind of have that clay kind of look to everything, and there's nothing particularly incredible about the lighting or anything along those lines, really. And for me, this isn't a big deal purely because of the fact that I'm usually more of a fan of a lot of the kind of budget and energy being put towards like innovation in gameplay as opposed to innovation in graphics. I don't think this would be a better game if it looked particularly different. I don't think it would be a better game if it looked more realistic or if it was really impressive graphically. Like, I don't think that is what it's missing. I think that the visual style they've actually ended up with, for me personally, is about exactly what I'd like from a game like this. Like, it looks very Arcane, obviously, while simultaneously just having its own fun, unique Redfall kind of aesthetic. And that's great, but clearly for a lot of people, it just looks like yet another game. Like, it looks like another Game Pass game, and that's not cutting it for them. So I wanted it to be mentioned here just for the sake of completeness, I suppose, but for me, not necessarily a huge deal. So, is there anything I do like, right? Like, what about the abilities, for instance? Sadly, that goes back to the combat loop, once again, just really not being that great. And granted, I haven't maxed out the skill tree yet, but I've done some investing into it, and the combat abilities just once again feel like they're not that impactful at the beginning of the game, so you don't really care about them all that much, so you're relying on your weapon, and your weapons feel crap, and the frame rate is low, so it's hard to aim at the enemies, and there's issues with the ADS sensitivity, like I mentioned, so it's even harder to aim at the enemies, and so you kind of get detached from combat in general. Like, I can't count the number of times I've already been like, you know what? I don't want to fight this vampire. Like, I don't want to go through the loop of trying to shoot it and then using a stake on it. Like, I just can't be bothered. Instead, I'm just going to run past it. Thankfully, that's actually worked a couple of times. Like, sometimes you have to kill them just for a quest or whatever, but when the core of your game experience, right, is shooting a vampire, staking it, and then moving on. And that itself isn't fun. Like, I already don't want to do that as much as I possibly can now. I want to avoid doing that in the game, and I'm only a couple hours in. That's a sign that you've failed. The combat loop has failed. And it's so sad because I really did want to love this game in many ways, I think, just because I'm an Arcane fan. And yet it's kind of unsuccessful at the most base level. And as such, so much of the rest of the game that I would love to love is almost inaccessible to me, because the most basic of encounters, the most basic of quests are just not that great, because the gunplay is really not that great, and you just feel like you're restricted by it so damn frequently. So it's in a really rough spot. However, I do think that there is a path forward from today where this game does eventually get a lot better. Reason being, I don't think Arcane are the kind of studio that are going to just let this game be a stain on their legacy kind of thing and leave it at that. Like, I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think that they've heard the feedback today. They've heard the feedback at previous events like the one that I went to where I was speaking to some of the dev team, and I mentioned a lot of these issues that I'm mentioning now. And I think there is a world, it's not a guarantee, but I think there's a world where they actually act on those and probably tune the game up so that graphically and performance-wise, it's a much more stable product, first of all. So base foundation improved. Second of all, they introduce a series of quality of life improvements just as patches over the next couple of months, which fix a lot of the base level issues with the game. The things that it gets wrong from sort of day one, from hour one, from scene one, those things that just make it feel a little bit clunky in areas, things that you really wish it had just to make your life easier, like being able to select a quest and highlight it on the map or something, whatever, right? Those sorts of things, I think, are definitely easily patchable over time. It might take some time to get there, but I think it's the sort of thing that is feasible. And then when those things are done, I obviously don't know how the game ends yet, but I could imagine a world where they release some kind of DLC for this game, despite the fact that it's probably going to sell pretty poorly because of all the bad press that it's got right now. And that DLC could amend a lot of the things that are wrong with it in terms of story too. So maybe the core story is always just going to be a bit meh, like a very sort of solid 6 out of 10. But I could see a world where they release a DLC where they've really figured out how to tell a story within this sandbox, and it doesn't rely on loads and loads of written notes, and the character conversations are a bit more interesting, and it does feel like you're playing a AAA product released in 2023, not one released in sort of 2014. And at that point, the game then might finally be worth playing. But until we get to that point, I don't think that this is worth your investment. I don't think it's worth your £45, £50, £60, your $70, whatever it is. And I don't even think really right now it's worth playing on Game Pass. It's sort of horrendous for me to be saying that. I can't believe it myself because I want to support and love this game so much, but it's missed expectations in such a horrific way, and it's going to take time to fix those things, not purchases. So I'm not going to recommend that you buy the game right now. I'm going to recommend that you keep it on your radar in a year's time, but for now, you just wait for Arcane to sort out what would have been better sorted out pre-launch. It feels like this is a scenario that's happening over and over again these days in the games industry, and it sucks. And I would never have expected it from this studio, but here we are. These things happen. It's really difficult making video games, and I understand that, and I wish the team nothing but the best. I have no personal ill will against them here. I really do want the best for Arcane. And so I'm hoping that some of the feedback I've given in this video is useful to them. And I might make some more feedback content at some point. And I mean, if they want to chat at some point as well, then hit me up, guys. I'm always down. So for you watching this video, the next thing that you could do if you don't want to play through Redfall is to watch me suffer through it. I'm doing a full walkthrough on my walkthroughs channel. Like I said, this is kind of part 1.5, but part 2 will be picking up where I've left off at the end of this video. And it's linked on screen right now. So if you want to come along for the ride and see what the game has to offer with me, then I'd love for you to do that. I'll see you there. Bye for now.